Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
In this week's news roundup, we're talking about how the work culture in big tech is shifting away from cushy benefits and into survival mode. And we're also talking about why outdated technology is at the heart of problems at Newark Airport and how AI is now transforming Washington. It's quite a mix of heavy topics. What do you want to dig into first, Ben?
Well, as somebody who always dreamed of having a big, cushy job, but for some reason has never had one, I want to talk about that one. But maybe we can talk about the FAA first and what's happening there, because that seems to be a lot more top of mind for people right now.
Yeah, you bet. So this has been an interesting one to follow. If you've been paying attention to the news recently, there's been a lot of problems happening at Newark Airport with radar outages, technology problems, and we're talking about an airport, right? Planes with people going in and out of the sky at a time when there's already a lot of anxiety around flying just because of recent snafus with planes all across the world, but especially here in American airports. And so at its core, this is a story about the FAA having to reapproach their technology with some rather unorthodox solutions, some of them which include buying parts off of eBay because the equipment they have on hand is so old and the stuff they
Wow.
have to replace it with is that difficult to source. I don't think this comes as a shock to anybody. Legacy systems are all across the government in all parts of the things that power our everyday. They're written in ancient languages like COBOL that only people over the age of 60 even know. And it really kind of sets us up for we have these like brittle systems or at least outdated systems that ran on technology of yesterday. But as we know, today's technology world is moving so fast. So you can imagine how much quicker these things are becoming antiquated. This is a high stakes situation because we're talking about planes that go in and out of the sky. No one wants to be on a plane wondering if the COBOL programming powering the radar at their air traffic control tower at their airport is going to work that day. But ultimately, these things are, they're just strapped under bureaucracy. This isn't a surprise to anybody that at its core, it's a human problem. We have a complex government that runs our world, and the way that it intersects with technology is not always elegant. And this is another example of that. So, Ben, what do you think about the story?
Yeah, we take a lot of technology for granted, especially like stuff like flying in an airplane, which has become so commonplace and such a norm, just in the last decade or so. In fact, I mean, I was even I did some plane travel just last week to go to the Code Remix Summit, and I was thinking about this story the entire time as I was getting on and off airplanes. I was very conscious of like for probably the first time in a while with flying, I was very conscious of like all of the little things that went into making sure that me and everyone else gets safely from one place to another. Um, and it kind of puts things in perspective when like there are delays and people get frustrated and like upset with the airline and all of that stuff. But that's just a fact of having like these high stakes environments.
Yeah.
Um, but speaking of Code Remix, one of the things that came up in discussion a lot there was how like software engineering as a whole really is in its infancy compared to most other engineering professions. Like think about how long like architecture as a practice has been around, like at least hundreds of years and maybe even arguably thousands of years. Like I'm not an expert on this, but people have been building stuff for a long time.
The Romans would have something to say, Ben.
Yeah, right. So the issue I think is that like the software industry is now dealing with this complex reality of legacy systems that are well beyond their end of life, in an industry that is relatively new on the grand time scale of humanity. And then on top of things, it's like rapidly being disrupted by AI. Like our producer Adam told me not to make this about AI, but naturally it's going to come up at some point. Uh, but at Code Remix, one of the biggest topics was app modernization, and I actually learned a few things on this topic. And a big takeaway was that when you're migrating from these legacy systems, there's this like complex interaction of these like deterministic and probabilistic systems that can be really hard to unwire sometimes. So like for flights, like on the deterministic side, you got to track the data and the location for all of these planes in real time to avoid collisions, right? Like either things are colliding or they're not colliding. Like there's only two situations there. But then there's also all these probabilistic elements like weather and schedule changes. Like you have to proactively and reactively adapt to dynamic environments. And a lot of the challenges that modernization faces is largely deterministic. Like, and in fact, this was a sentiment that was echoed by a recent guest, Animash Mishra from Diff Blue, which was also like to bring this full circle. They were also a Code Remix sponsor, which is really cool to see their tech partnership. But air traffic control is dealing with all of these typical software issues, but then this whole layer of added complexity of both federal regulations and outdated infrastructure that we really do like. We need coordinated investment into this.
Completely agree. And good shout out for our past guest from Diff Blue, because Animesh really harped on this topic and explained how the root of all of these problems and how we have to solve them with tools like Diff Blue.
Yeah, so let's keep this technology and the U.S. federal government train going, Angie. What's our next story?
Oh yeah, so we're talking about how this isn't news to anybody, how technology and such is being overthrown in the U.S. government, and this has to go back obviously to the core of Doge and its mandate or its goals to overhaul technology within the government. And these agencies are now putting in place top-down AI initiatives to achieve those goals. And if you work in software engineering, like many of our listeners do, this probably sounds really familiar. We're all in this environment where we get these top-down AI initiatives. But
Yeah.
we're talking about an industry and a field that is deeply rooted in technology, much also younger, like you just called out, Ben, in terms of compared to other fields and studies. Like, sure, architecture's been around for hundreds or thousands of years, but so has governance, right? And so when you try to put AI in place of that, it introduces a lot of complex problems. Now, when we're talking about the government trying to overhaul traditional programs with AI, we're talking mostly about replacing bureaucratic workers, middle management workers, those kind of like cushy government jobs with pensions that we might think of at the IRS or otherwise, with automated systems powered by AI. Now, this is obviously a very, appealing thing for many to explore, just like how it is in software engineering, because when you have a hammer like AI, everything kind of does start to look like a nail. You want to try to take it and apply it to all sorts of new problems. So in a world where, or rather in a place like, government where you have a lot of antiquated and legacy problems, it's really appealing to try to take this new tech to it. But it obviously is a highly nuanced issue because, again, the stakes are so high. We're talking about systems that power our world, that allow people to get access to healthcare, to benefits, to money that they're entitled to from various programs, things that actually might keep people alive in many circumstances. So the stakes for implementing this are way, way, way higher than most of us ever deal with in software engineering. Um, Something that this story reminded me of coming in and trying to replace people in old systems with AI. It reminded me of like the Klarna AI memo that was came out in recent weeks, recent months about replacing customer service representatives with AI. And in like the past week or so, they've quietly been putting back up job postings for customer service reps and
Of
walking
course.
back those statements about replacing people with AI. And it goes to show that, Klarna might have learned something in that process, that you can't fully replace those systems with something like AI technology, that sometimes problems do ultimately need to be handled by people. Just maybe the skills that the people are using are evolving. So this is a highly nuanced issue, and it's not news to anybody, but it is kind of a new development in terms of putting top-down AI initiatives in
Yeah.
place. What do
So
you
I
think,
think,
Ben?
yeah, the big story here is that, these top-down AI initiatives appear to be coming for the government as well, both in Doge, but also the IRS. And, look, I'm like basically 50 GPTs in a trench coat at this point. So like, I totally get the desire to like apply AI to a bunch of situations, like particularly at the IRS. I could see why they would want to do this, but neither one of these organizations is being very transparent about how they're applying it. And my concern is that there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way. Like the right way is to use it for these probabilistic challenges, like I mentioned earlier. So, like, for example, the IRS might want to use AI to like feed it some filtered data sets, and then use AI to like predict unusual or suspicious behaviors. Like probabilistic detection, like that, is generally, a good application for AI. But then there's
Yep.
also the wrong way when you try to like apply it to like deterministic challenges. Like I don't want AI trying to determine how much I owe for taxes every year, and I don't think anyone listening to this would want that either. So, I hope more of the former is happening rather than the latter. But
Yeah.
I think when you really think about it, like there's a deeper story here that ties both the last story and this story together, and that there really is just a lot of software infrastructure that is aging. Particularly, like I imagine the U.S. federal government is not the only government in the world that's facing this, but does seem particularly acute within the United States. And we're just lacking like coordinated modernization programs. Like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to like we had the Civilian Conservation Corps back during like the Depression, where you had young people that would just get paid and they would have housing just to go out and build things for the public. Like when I found out about this, I was hiking in a state park and stopped in a shelter and like read this plaque that explained that people that were there 100 years before me built this thing so that I could enjoy it like almost 100 years later. And we don't really have any sort of like practices or very many practices like that today, particularly not for software. Like, there's no like AmeriCorps for software that I'm aware of, at least. And I would fully support like some sort of initiative to do things like that to help our government and our public sector like modernize. And the truth is, there's just so many opportunities out there. Like, there's more opportunities than there are people like solving those challenges today. And I'm aware that like this has been a little U.S. heavy so far. Like we have a lot of listeners that aren't in the U.S. And I imagine some of those governments have really figured out how to modernize technology versus like there's probably plenty of others that also have not. If you've seen really cool things where you live, like we would love to hear about it. Like come share it with us on Substack. Like if you're hearing this podcast, there's already a newsletter out for this today. Go out there and comment on it and share some interesting stories about what your government is doing to handle this modernization problem.
Yeah. Really great coverage. And I completely agree. And Ben, do you want to tell us a little bit more about our last news story of the day, talking about layoffs that have hit Microsoft?
Yeah, yet another week, yet another round of layoffs. I mean, it just feels to me like this is Microsoft announcing just their annual layoffs. This year it was 3% of the workforce. I think that was somewhere around 6 or 7,000 people. Again, it looks like the typical big tech layoff, like not really based on like performance or like strategic value. It just kind of hits across the board. Like, it's basically just a ham-fisted like cut across everything. Like at least that's the way it looks to me on the outside. I'm not saying that's exactly what it is. Um, and of course, I empathize. Like it really sucks to be like one of those workers that just wakes up one day and finds out that your job doesn't exist, and it's kind of become this unfortunate reality of working in big technology.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing other companies like not necessarily lay off right now, but like Amazon just announced some new pay structure that the way they try to position it is that it will consistently favor high performing employees at the expense of what they designate as low performing employees. And of course, if you know anything about Amazon, they have a habit of like effectively stack ranking a lot of their employees. I don't know if it's strict stack ranking, but it certainly looks a lot like it. But I kind of get the sense that like big tech is losing their luster. Like, what do you think about that, Andrew?
Yeah, I think that the perception of these like cushy tech jobs with the benefits has definitely been eroded since the pandemic, maybe even a little bit before.
Yeah.
Um, there was a time, maybe about like a decade ago, where those jobs were seen as places where you could go and you could build that expertise and get paid really well and work in a big office with lots of benefits and just have maybe you don't have that work life balance that other industries do, but because you were showered in all of these amazing benefits that other industries did not have, it became a unique haven where people really strived to kind of achieve it. But
Yeah.
in the wake of all of these layoffs and return to office mandates, which are kind of like soft layoffs and everything in between, along with, of course, the pandemic, the shuttering of a lot of those offices, the closing of a lot of like the food catering and like the free drinks and whatever the case, like all of those shiny things that made tech so cool to race to try to be in these big companies like a Fang or something, they kind of eroded. And what's happened is in that decade, time doesn't stop. So you have new folks entering the workforce, you have Gen Z now entering the workforce, and they have an entirely different perception about careers and traditional jobs than other generations do. This new wave of Gen Z workers, they don't see traditional careers in tech as those safe havens, and they don't see it as a safe bet for their skills or their career. In fact, the best thing that they think they can do for themselves, which I agree, is to build their own expertise and their own brand because you can never lay yourself off. And so I think that that is like an ultimately a mindset shift for how people are entering the tech world. And it's something that leaders need to consider when they think about their job postings or going out there and trying to bring in new folks, that there's not this de facto, "Oh, cool, it's software engineering," appeal to it anymore, and especially if you're in an environment where layoffs are frequent or possible, are anxieties, involved with that too, that are important to address. Don't just let it be this elephant in the room that no one talks about.
Yeah, you made a good point about these traditionally being viewed as like a career builder, a resume builder. And I wonder if like the fact that they've had more than like a decade at this point of that sort of status, if maybe they've attracted like the wrong types of people, like people who aren't there because they want to work at Microsoft or at Amazon or Google, but people that just want to work there so that they can get to the next gig that will pay them more, give them more recognition or whatever have you. But
Right.
we also feel like I also feel like we're in a period where like and this comes in cycles, but right now we're going through a period of everyone being focused heavily on efficiency rather than like trying to grow. Like it's growth through efficiency rather than just growing through growth, you know.
Right.
And I wonder how much of this also is like just the writing on the wall that like AI driven teams are going to scale at a much faster rate than human driven teams. Like if you're relying on increasing human headcount to scale, like that's not nearly as it's not going to be nearly as impactful as teams that can use AI to scale their efforts. And if you really think about it, you know, small teams have always had this advantage of being more nimble than the large corporations, but they've never had the advantage of being able to move faster than the big companies. And AI is kind of leveling the playing field on that to some extent, at least in the short term, it feels like. So you know, we've already seen how some companies like are refusing to hire new roles if it's a job that could be automated through AI.
Yeah.
So you know, and maybe I'm just biased because I work for a small company, but it really does feel like small companies have the biggest potential for growth in the AI era, and maybe we're seeing big tech respond to that by trying to make their teams smaller and more nimble.
Yeah. I agree.
So Andrew, who's our guest today?
Yeah, in just a moment, Ben and I both are sitting down with Kelly Vaughn of Zapier, and we're talking about life after burnout and putting the brakes on ambition. You don't want to miss this one.
So we're back at Dev Interrupted with a veteran, Kelly Vaughn, Senior Engineering Manager at Zapier and author of The Modern Leader and After Burnout newsletters. Kelly, it's been such a long time. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to start you off with a little lesson. The
Oh,
pronunciation of the company is Zapier. You can
Thank
always
you.
remember that Zapier makes you happier.
wow. Calling me out right at the start of the episode.
This is a new title. Every time I've been on here, I had my director of engineering title at Spot AI, so this is all new. I had to squeeze that one in there.
All right. Well, I'll do my best to get it right the rest of the show. I can't make promises. So yeah, so well, to kick things off, like formally, I want to congratulate you for this new position. You know, Andrew and I are both big fans of the company. We've both used it for quite a while. Sounds like you have as well. So that's pretty awesome. And we'll maybe dive a little bit into your work.
Awesome,
But
yeah.
yeah, so but first, if you've been following the show for a few years, you might remember that Kelly is a trained therapist. And because of this background, we've always appreciated your insight on the more human aspects of engineering. In fact, your episode from 2022, which was titled Treating Devs Like Human Beings, is actually one of our most popular episodes of all time. So it's clearly a subject that our audience like really cares about.
And it's popular for a reason. Topics like burnout, which is what we're going to cover today, they've always resonated really deeply with the Dev Interrupted audience. But what makes today's conversation a little different is that it's not about recognizing burnout on your team or in someone that you manage in that capacity, but it's about recognizing burnout in yourself and seeing burnout when you look in the mirror ultimately. And Kelly, you wrote about this in a blog post about burnout and leaving your previous job. And it's an incredibly candid post. We definitely encourage those listening to go check it out. We're going to have links to it and we'll be discussing it today. And we wanted to have you on the show to see what would motivate you to be so open and candid about this experience and what we can all learn from it. And allows us to ask a broader question, in the excitement in the hype around AI, are we forgetting to address fundamental age-old human challenges within our teams and cultures? AKA, are we moving so fast we're forgetting the basics?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to talk about this because, as you said, we had a conversation about it back in 2022. And as somebody who, as a trained therapist, I'm very familiar with the signs of burnout. And yet I fell victim to it myself. And it also goes to show that even therapists need therapists because we all need that third party to remind us what's going on. So yeah, I'm super excited to dig into this with you.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to kick off with is, as a fellow millennial, you shared a quote about millennials who are climbing the corporate ladder in their 20s, only to start climbing back down for various reasons in their 30s. So, how does this reflect the pressures that you've observed or even experienced within the engineering world? And, particularly, I think you might have some things to say around this like 10x engineer, like ideal statement that we have out there.
Yeah, I love this quote. It forever will live rent free in my head at this point, just because it's very much where I'm at. When you're in your 20s, you're promised all these great things if you work really hard. We can go into a whole nother episode on all the millennial promises that we've been made. But you work really hard to progress in your career, and we grew up, I'm air quoting, grew up there at a time when the market was responding so positively to us getting into engineering and the venture money that was available. A ton of companies were hiring really fast, which means people were moving up really quickly, and you saw all these opportunities to, continue to grow in your own career. And as you continue to move up, you kind of lose sight of where you came from because you're moving so incredibly quickly on this train that you really need to hop off at some point. We don't take enough time to reflect on where we've been and how we got to where we are today. And we often equate a lot of these things to skill, that I am very good at my job and therefore I'm earning these promotions and pay raises and larger scopes of work. And in a way that is true, but there's also a lot of luck that got us to where we are today as well. And so, now that we're in our 30s and, of the varying range for millennials, we've hit this wall starting with the pandemic, and we're starting to see a very different world in engineering where we've been moving at lightning speed this entire time while the world continues to move rapidly, especially in this age of AI, that we feel the need to keep up this pace that is just impossible to do. We want to run really fast and continue to run forever. And it's just you can only handle so much of that. I am picking back up on running after an injury that I had last year, and I have to start training for I'm choosing to start training for my first marathon. I'm running Detroit this year. And I've run half marathons before, but because of this injury, I'm basically starting from zero again, or it feels like I'm starting from zero. So you have to intentionally slow down in order to speed back up again. And we are now moving into this phase where we are also having to intentionally slow down, remember who we are as a company or who we are as engineers, and figure out, what is actually going to get us to where we want to be and what do we want to do as well.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of one of my favorite songs from the White Stripes, just a random shout out, but it's about how we all get started out in little rooms, with few resources, not a lot available to us. And it's really just us with our own capabilities. And as you level up, you get bigger and bigger rooms with more resources and more capabilities. And it can be really helpful to just stop for a moment and think like, how did I get started in that little room? And like, what can I learn to apply today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not only like, how did I get started, but is what I'm doing today what I want to be doing? Because, you blink and suddenly you're
Yeah.
taking on more responsibility that you never really wanted. That feels almost like a left turn from your original career. And in some cases, that's fine. People change careers all the time, but you do need to sit down and reflect, is this actually what you want to do? By the time I left Spot, I was overseeing engineering for a video management system product. I was overseeing product for that same product. I was also a head of IT, and I was also overseeing security and GRC, doing all of our SOC 2 and HIPAA audits, all of our security reviews for enterprise customers. I was going on site with customers to close deals. And, when I started as a director of engineering, obviously this is a lot broader scope. This is 4 different jobs in one. And so that is really what gave me pause. And like, am I actually doing what do I want to do with my life? Who do I want to be when I grow up? Because I don't think it's for people.
It hits a certain part, especially when you start growing in skills and responsibilities, and as you're saying, like, you're moving faster and faster, taking advantage of, like, this light speed opportunity in front of you. You'd be silly not to jump into that jet stream and just kinda see where it could take you, but the further you go down that, and the more you accumulate in terms of experiences and responsibilities, the more doors that actually close on you, and that if those doors are closing and those doors are doors that you wanted to go through, then now you're having to shift course, and it's because of just the things that you're doing, not because of the aspirations that you've set. And this is how I think folks get on these like in a train mindset of like I'm going as fast as I can. I'm accumulating all of these experiences. I'm going to build, and do all these things. And then before you know it, just like you described, you're doing like 4 jobs. Like I relate with that so much. Like I've had a job I've done before where you start doing one thing really well, and then everyone recognizes and sees how good you are at that one thing. They must be good at a lot of other things, right? And then you start
Yep.
getting more responsibilities, and you're like, oh, this is great. I'm going to cut my teeth on this and on this. I'm going to know how to do this. And a lot of times it's so great. It gets you way ahead of other people. But, for yourself, it closes doors on maybe things you would have rather been spending your time on. And it ultimately comes down to making sure that you stay true to yourself, like you said. And taking advantage of that blank slate is like so critical, because even when you wipe it all away and it feels like, oh, I have nothing, or I'm resetting, or I'm back at square one, you're never truly back at square one, because now you're packed with all of those insights and learnings from having just done that journey, and you've shed all of that baggage that you didn't want to carry anymore. Those 5 suitcases you're taking to France, like whatever the case, like maybe you don't have to take them anymore. It's like, what could you do now that you don't have to lug around 5 bags? Changes your whole trip.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And to add on to that, I think we fear those closing doors. Every time we say yes to something, we're saying no to many other things because you can only take on so much.
Yeah.
And we fear what those no's are or what those no's could have been. And we get so single track on what we're thinking about and where we want to go, yet we're always thinking about what we're missing out on. And this is why, taking that moment to pause and sit back for a second allows you to reflect on which doors have closed. Which doors do I wish had opened in the past that I could have gone through? And which ones am I grateful that I did go down? Like I'm a recovering entrepreneur, as I say. I have a lot of experience running companies. I am now working for somebody else's company. And while I don't have aspirations to start my own company anytime soon, it is possible that I might in the future. There is so much I learned from that journey that I take into my everyday work working for somebody else. And that is a huge value add for me as an employee as well, to really understand the business and customer side of things, even if it's not a core part of my job today.
Yeah. I want to ask too, in that environment where Ben defined about like the 10x engineering culture, it's in that environment, there's a lot of external and internal pressures. You and I have talked a bit about now about like those internal pressures of like, I'm going to go as fast as I can. But zooming in on those external pressures, those things that happen in our environment, in the organization that we're in, what kind of demands or norms around this 10x engineer culture really drives towards that burnout that you saw in yourself and that others experience?
I think what we're seeing today with AI is a massive, massive example of this. I saw it at my previous company. I can see it in my current company, and it's not a flaw necessarily, but it's just, it's part of the hype train, You're like, there are so many really cool things that we can do with AI. It is still, nascent, all things considered, when you look back at how long HTML has been a thing, and we're learning so much as we go, but it also means that if you're not continuously learning, you're falling behind. And it's easy to fall into that trap to say, well, I have to learn everything available to me and I have to keep up with whatever, is trending in the market, understanding MCP, for example. What in the world is that? Do I need to learn this? Is this actually beneficial for me? I think it's pretty cool personally. In Zapier's MCP, little plug there, is also really cool that we have something actually official at the company as well. But these kinds of things can fall into a trap, and you can also see it, when you're looking from the outside looking in. This can affect your own job as well, because you can feel like you're suddenly having to pivot again and again and again. Like, what is actually on the roadmap? What is going to be most important to our customers? What are customers asking for? And customers, especially your early adopters, they're always going to be like, oh, well, I heard about this. Are you doing anything with this? And somebody might be like, oh, yes, we absolutely are, when we had absolutely no plans to do that. And suddenly you're having to adapt your work. And
Right.
you can leverage AI for your day-to-day, and I highly encourage everybody to find ways to leverage AI for your day-to-day. But when it becomes all-encompassing as like, this is now your culture as a company, it can feel like you are moving at a 10x pace. And you need that time to slow down, because I think we've all experienced that the faster you move with whatever you're building, especially on the engineering side of things, you start to have to make intentional trade-offs. And typically, the first thing to go is test coverage. I've seen this again and again and again.
First
And
casualty.
yes, exactly. And so if you're trying to build a product that is supposed to continuously support a large number of customers, and you're starting to reduce test coverage in favor of building faster, you're going to start to feel the ripple effects of that. And it's very demoralizing as an engineering team to constantly hear about the complaints of this doesn't work and this doesn't work and this is broken and this looks kind of funny. When are you going to spend time working on this? When you're getting a lot of top-down pressure to continue to build the next thing. And that is how people end up burning out.
Yeah, and it's, whenever I unlock like a new workflow with AI, like, I'm guilty of this. The first thing that comes to mind is like, how can I now move as quickly as possible with this workflow that I've unlocked? And, the problem is that if you're going in the wrong direction, all you're doing is bad things even faster than you've ever been capable of
Yes.
before.
Exactly.
And I also think it's really helpful when you can, as somebody kind of views myself, and I think Andrew's kind of in the same boat, and maybe you are as well, Kelly, but I view myself as someone who's kind of on the ahead of the curve on AI adoption. Like, I've really embraced it in a lot of different ways. I also find it's really helpful to share learnings with other people, because it helps you put yourself, relatively speaking, where you are in, like, everyone's trying to stay ahead and learn the next greatest thing. It helps you understand, relatively speaking, where you are compared to everyone else, because the reality is that the vast majority of the world is still extremely early to this stuff. So, like, you might feel this pressure, like maybe you're a high performer that feels this pressure to work as quickly as possible using AI because you think someone else is going to catch up to you if you don't. But the reality might be that you're actually like doing extremely well, and it's like just kind of keep the course and maintain quality and keep doing the right thing and just gradually augment your workflows.
Exactly. If you try to completely revamp your entire workflow, this goes for building any habit, honestly. If you try
Yeah.
to change too much at once, it's not going to be sustainable. Try something, see if it's actually helpful for you, run a tiny experiment on that, and if it doesn't work, then pivot. If it works, then great, you can now try something new. But if you try to keep up with everybody else or choose like one specific person that you're like, air quotes, competing with to know as much as they know, when you don't know why they're learning or how much time they're able to dedicate towards learning or how it affects their life, their career, their job, you're not going to be on the same footing. There's always going to be differences there. If I were to poll my group of friends and ask them how they're using AI in their day-to-day, they'll be like, I'm not. Or maybe they're like, oh yeah, I occasionally chat with ChatGPT. And like, that's the extent of it. Like, this,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
all relative.
I had it help me plan my trip to France, right?
Oh man, I
Something like
actually
that.
used it for our last trip to France when we went to Lyon, and it planned some fantastic like side trips for us
Nice.
to the home of Michelin, for example. It found an amazing restaurant that I swear is going to be a Michelin guide restaurant or a Michelin starred restaurant at some point. Yeah, I mean,
Incredible.
ChatGPT is great for travel.
It
Yeah.
is.
So, I mean, let's double down on this AI stuff, because I mean, if you're a regular listener of this show, you know, practically every week at this point we're talking about it because it seems to be impacting all facets of software development. So let's think specifically, like, you know, as teams are adopting AI, you know, I think the people who are probably going to be under a lot of pressure in this environment are like your high performers within your organization. So what are some of the traditional signs of burnout that managers should be on the lookout for, and how do you think AI like impacts that?
I look for slip in quality of work, first off, like what's going on so we can have a conversation. I look for behaviors, like how are you showing up to meetings? Are you showing up to meetings? How is your communication style changed? If people start to become a little bit more cynical, that is usually a cue to me that they might, I appreciate skepticism. Being cynical is taking it to a whole different level. And when they start to cross over that line into cynicism, that's when I'm like, okay, something's going on here. And you know, I will ask them like, what has changed recently? Your workflows, your workload. How are you actually completing your work these days? I've noticed some people who were early adopters of using Cursor, for example, their code quality actually decreased because they felt that they had to move so fast that they were becoming wholly reliant on it, and they were shipping less than stellar quality of code. And it
Well, I mean,
happens sometimes.
when you mentioned the slip in quality, I was like, doesn't that just naturally happen when you adopt AI?
That's where the skepticism is important.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to help me, but how well will it help me?
So then obviously you're incentivized by these tools and these environments to move really fast. Sometimes in some cases ship less than stellar stuff. I think that's a pressure a lot of engineers, especially those that pursue excellence, are feeling right now. They want to, you know, hold on to their process because their process delivers really excellent results that frankly go above what an AI can typically deliver if they're highly specialized or have a lot of domain knowledge. And so is there advice that you would give like a leader or a team about creating this environment where like people are all on the same team and aligned about how they're going to be using the tools, but also those holdouts are kind of getting educated about like, this is what I need to do to level up my workflow so it works for me without burning everybody out?
Yeah. I think if there's pressure from the business to adopt AI in your everyday, that needs to be made clear first and foremost from a leadership perspective and how you want your team to adopt AI. I think it's also really beneficial for you to all sit down and just knowledge share of how you're leveraging AI. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be on your team, especially if it's like a company directive. Make this an open channel of communication, because whatever you're doing in with AI and engineering, somebody from support or somebody from sales will be able to get an idea from that and apply that to their own day-to-day. So the more that you can discuss it, the more you're creating an open forum of what works and what doesn't. And it'll also help bring along those who don't have that same level of trust in AI, who are used to that very high level of excellence, for example, that they're like, well, I can do this better on my own. If you have some other high performer saying, hey, I am also very much on the same boat as you. However, here is how I'm using AI to help augment what I'm doing, where I still feel like I am in control of my destiny. And then you can kind of create some like mentorship and some coaching opportunities in there to bring everybody along. I would also get a pulse check on how the company or your team is feeling about adopting AI as well. And just do that regularly, like every 2 weeks or so, especially at the rate AI is moving. Like, what cool thing did you learn about AI? How are you feeling about adding AI into your workflows for this particular reason, And you can also kind of see, and I'm sure if we were to look back at the past 2-3 months of AI adoption within an organization, you'll see more and more and more folks finding opportunities to adopt AI beyond just like asking ChatGPT questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I love your idea of cross-pollinating, even outside of engineering, because I mean we are really at a state right now where we're all fundamentally learning like basic capabilities. Like in the long term, like we'll look back on now and look at what we're learning as a pretty basic fundamental capability of using AI. Like there's going to be so much more down the road from this.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I love AI agents because they're leveling the playing field in a way. Because you don't have to be a developer to get the full extent out of AI.
Mhm.
And I have never seen in my entire professional career something so substantial in this market where somebody in sales who is non-technical can take just as much advantage of AI as I can. Now, building your own MCP server might be a whole different conversation. That is still a fairly technical thing, but you're still able to take a lot of advantage through, the open network that Claude has created, for example, that they recently launched. And you don't have to know how to code to do any of this.
Yeah, actually, Andrew and I have been talking about this concept of disposable code a lot more frequently.
Yep.
Like non-technical people, particularly, would never think to solve their problems with code in the past, but today, like it actually does make a lot more sense to maybe ask ChatGPT to write some Python to solve your problem,
Exactly.
and then just run it. You're not deploying it to production. You just need to solve a problem.
Yeah, it is making rapid prototyping truly rapid. And I love that.
Yep.
So long as you don't take that prototype and immediately ship it to production, because
Yeah, with
that is where we start to get
authentication
issues.
and
Exactly.
user information and financial. Yeah.
And in this conversation, we can kind of divide it almost into like a hero's journey. Like we talked a bit in the beginning about being in this lightning fast culture and learning fast and moving quick, and then climbing up a career ladder and ultimately burning out, right? But now we're in that part of the journey where you're after the burnout. You've had all the benefit of being able to reflect back on that experience, understand how that happened to you, someone who's very trained in recognizing this. And in doing so, you're able to unlock a lot of learnings that I think everyone can take a lot of note from. And we definitely want to dive into them here. But I want to start actually by going back to that moment, because you described a burnout not being sudden, but like a slow realization. So going back into that haze of time where burnout was starting to really set in on you, can you walk us through where you were at when that awareness started to dawn on you and you realized it wasn't something temporary?
Yeah, it's really fascinating to be, reflecting in my own experience, because it was probably over the course of 6 months. Like it was not a short window. And if I reflect back then, my husband called it out way before I ever did. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's fine. This is just a stressful moment right now and we'll get through it." And that stressful moment continued month after month after month. And the way the stress presented itself changed over time as well. From feeling extremely bored in my work and feeling like lost of what am I doing? Like, who am I as a person, as a manager? What am I doing here? To being so totally overwhelmed with the amount of work that was suddenly on my plate. So that piece of it changed. But what didn't change is my sleep started to decrease. Like the amount I slept started to decrease. The amount, like the quality of sleep I was getting was decreasing. Little physical things. My resting heart rate started to increase. I have a naturally low resting heart rate, and it was 10 over what it typically is. I usually sit in the 50s, and my resting heart rate was like constantly in like the 60s, 70s. I would take the weekend off, air quotes there. And I would be stressing about work the entire time, like all the things that I didn't get through, or in the time when I felt extremely bored or just like lost in my career, like what should I be doing? And I started having more conversations with individuals at the company, with my husband, with my friend. But one of the things that really stood out to me in this process is I noticed how unhappy I was, and I started to notice that my mood was changing at work. I was no longer bought into the mission that we were building. I was starting to pick things apart of like, why are we doing this? This seems like a really bad idea. When normally I would question it, as anybody should, again, healthy dose of skepticism, but I was leaning more from that skepticism side into cynicism. And that was a really big cue for me that like, I'm not even happy with what I'm doing anymore. And, now that I've left the company, I'm still like very much team Spot, and I do believe that what they're building is going to be fantastic, and I am cheering them all like on along the sidelines, and actually physically removing myself from the company helped me rebuild that respect for what the company was building. And that was a
Yeah.
very fascinating finding for me.
Yeah, I've actually been in that same exact shoe before. The way you call it out about how it evolves into cynicism, my personality, I really relate with that because it's exactly how I see it in myself too. I get cynical. That doesn't just happen in burnout, that happens in anything in my life where it starts to go beyond what I want it to be. And so but when you remove yourself though, and you're able to kind of like take that taste out of your mouth about it,
Yeah,
it really you start to feel a lot better, not in a reminiscent way, not like I want to go back their way, like
right.
nothing's calling you back there, but you the respect that you had for what you were building and what your coworkers were doing, it returns to you. And when that happens, it does help you feel a little more human again, because that cynicism pit that you get in is not fun.
Exactly. And I called this out in that blog post that I had written, that I felt like a shell of a human.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of other health related things that were going on at the same time. And I was seeing a number of doctors to get some diagnoses that I've been waiting on for a very long time. And so I know that was also contributing to it, but it was showing up physically. Like the stress was showing up physically in my body in ways that I never would have imagined. I can count on my two hands how many times I have felt hungry this year. It's that kind of thing that you never actually think about. And suddenly you're like, oh, I actually kind of feel a little bit hungry. And air quotes, no normal person would even give that any thought. Or they might be like, I'm hungry, I'm going to go get a snack. Meanwhile, I'm like, I'm hungry. Whoa, I'm hungry. This is cool. How exciting.
I'm
And
having a
it's
human experience of like I'm having an
human
authentic bodily driven experience. Oh wow.
exactly.
And Kelly, I think we're the same person. I only eat when other people are around. I need a schedule of people to make me eat because I don't get the hunger thing to pull. Some people get hangry and then they got to stop
hmm
everything and go eat. I'm not
I'm
like
not that.
that.
No.
I'm a foodie. I love my food, but like I can easily forget to eat, and that's my own problem to deal with. But like when those little moments, when you could cheer out like, "Woo, I'm
Exactly.
hungry," it makes you feel like a human. I'm right
Yeah.
there with you.
I've been working with a dietitian since December, and she taught me about mechanical eating and how important it is for especially those of us like I am being treated for an eating disorder. So that is one part of this. But for those of us who are very sedentary, but also very like sitting at a desk all day thinking about our work in a very high stress environment, one of the first things your body will do is start to shut down certain signals to like save memory. Like your battery is running low on your laptop or your
Right.
phone, background processes stop running. One of those background processes that stops running is those hunger fullness cues. And I'm doing what's called mechanical eating, which is basically I eat on a very set schedule. I don't feel hungry, but I know my body is wanting food because, well, it needs energy somehow. And I am now starting to get those hunger cues back because it's learning that it's actually safe. And it can actually start to, say, okay, I know I'm going to get food. So therefore, I'm just giving you a hint like, hey, it's probably time that we need to eat. And that is recovery for me. And it's not just like the eating disorder recovery. It is recovery from stress, which I think is
Yeah.
one of the coolest things to actually watch happen. Requires a lot of patience. It has been almost 5 months in the making. Now we're getting to that point, but it is so cool to actually see now.
You are. I feel like I'm learning so much about myself right now. But one thing that really resonates with me is, how this settled in as a gradient that sort of culminated in this like sudden realization that you were unhappy and that something needed to be changed. And you mentioned like in one of your blog articles about how as this gradient was happening, you were trying to implement these like temporary fixes to solve it. Like you're offloading meetings, you're setting new boundaries with people. But at the end of the day, you ultimately concluded that like you just needed some change because the some real change because this gradient wasn't really working for you. So why do you think it was that those initial boundary setting attempts weren't enough for your situation?
I was too far gone. I think, if you catch the signals early enough and you're like, hey, I actually haven't taken a vacation in months, it's probably time for me to take some time off work. That can actually be really healing for people. For me, it had been, I went on a vacation back in October of last year, and due to some specific work situation, I ended up being on my laptop 9 out of the 10 days that I was off. And even for like 5-10 minutes, but I never actually truly disconnected. And reflecting back on that, like I have not had a proper like unplugged vacation in a very long time. And that was part of the problem. And so, I talked to a number of folks afterwards and they're like, are you sure? I took 10 days off between leaving Spot and starting at Zapier. And a lot of people were like, are you sure 10 days is enough? And for most people, I would say like take as much time off as you can. I have bills to pay for one thing. And second, like this is just what I want to do. But for me, it wasn't the amount of time off that I needed. It was the physical change of environment that I knew I needed. And, to be honest, I took those 10 days off. I have 2 weeks of onboarding that I just completed. And now I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. So if you really think about it, it's like 5.5 weeks. So yes, it's not a formal 10 days off. I'm just getting paid for 4 of those out of 4 of those 5 weeks.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier how you still believe in the mission of Spot, and you still think what they're doing is really awesome. And I agree with you. I've seen their advertisements. Super cool product. I'm really impressed by what y'all were building over there. So, you made this decision to leave a role where you were pretty influential. You cared really deeply about the mission, and you were solving some like difficult challenges. So, what was the process of finally deciding that you had to put yourself first over this company that you had grown pretty attached to?
One of the things my dietitian told me, I was talking to her and she could tell how stressed I was. And, we've obviously been talking for months about it at this point. And she just told me point blank, you are never going to recover if you do not fix the environment that is stressing you out. And to be told that, it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is actually my responsibility and nobody's going to magically fix this for me. And that same week, I was having a conversation with my best friend and there was something that she had wanted me to do and I completely dropped the ball on it. And I felt awful about that. And that like I was supposed to attend like an event that I ended up backing out of at the very last minute. And one thing she said to me was like, I just want my best friend back. Like you are not yourself. And, my best friend can talk to me however she wants because I hope she could always be that direct with me. And to have my dietitian call me out and my best friend call me out in that same week, I was like, okay, somebody needed to kind of give me that swift kick to say, you are responsible for this change and you need to make this change.
Yeah, that's big. That's a big call out. Imagine that hit pretty hard. So.
Oh yeah. I'm grateful to have a network and have the relationships available to me to, tell me as it is and call me out when I need to be called out. As I said, like my husband noticed my change, my downward slope months before I did. And, when you're so close to it, this goes for anything that you do in your life. When you're so close to something, you're the last person to notice a change. And it helps to have those external factors of somebody who can, keep you in check.
Yeah. So, and through all this journey, you've started a new newsletter that's a little bit more personal than your last one, I would say. So what was the motivation behind wanting to share this journey so openly? Because, I mean, it is a vulnerable journey. You're talking about personal health and deeply personal issues. So why did you start this and what are you hoping that other people will gain from it?
When I published the blog post on, or I guess the newsletter on the modern leader on quitting and burnout and just talking about my experience through that, the number of people who've reached out to me to say, I am going through something very similar. And it wasn't until I read what you wrote that you defined the problem for me. And it happens so often. And we are in such a state right now, and kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, where we are moving at lightning speed. And the job market is not great. Like we know that it's not great. And so we do fear leaving as well. But we can only handle so much of this. And when you're so deep in the weeds of something, as I said, like you don't typically notice. You're the last person to find out. And the number of people who reached out to me saying like this resonated with me so much. I have always been the type of person who openly shares my journey on whatever it is that I'm thinking about or going through. And this is a very heavy topic, but I think it's a necessary topic for people to understand, like, this is not an uncommon thing. This is something that a lot of people go through very quietly. And there is another side to it. There is a way out of it. But sometimes you just need somebody to hold your hand and say, you're going through it and it sucks. And this is what it's going to look like on the other side. And this is everything that I'm thinking about as I'm continuing to process this myself. I am feeling infinitely better than I did, weeks ago. But even then, like, I still have my bad days. I'm going to continue to have my bad days. And that's why I want to journal about it. And I'm treating After Burnout like a journal. Now, my actual journal has very different phrasing in it, which we are not sharing those. So I am cleaning things up a little bit. But I want you to get a real look into the day-to-day of what it looks like to be recovering from burnout. And that is also why I'm not following like a typical publishing schedule for this. Like when I have a thought, I publish it. And, it might get annoying at some point when you receive 3 emails from me in a week, but it's a very brain active week that week. So we'll see how it goes. I'm about 30 days into publishing at this point, which is wild to think that it's already been that long.
Wow. It sounds like a cool journey that we'll definitely be staying tuned for. As we learn a little bit more about your after burnout experience, and something that you've shared as a really powerful takeaway as part of that is that it's okay to outgrow a version of yourself that once fit or once was like your entire identity. It's perfectly fine to completely shed that and become someone new based of those experiences. And I'm curious to know, based on the things you've shared and how you have this healthy outlook for your new role, how's your definition of ambition and success shifted for you already?
That is a really good question. I'm actually writing a newsletter right now, like a longer form blog post for paid subscribers right now on grieving that loss of ambition, because I am still ambitious and I'm always going to be ambitious because this is who I am as a person. But how I'm approaching ambition is different this time. I'm going in with a lot more caution, and I'm going in making sure that I'm keeping an appropriate pace to my ambition. I'm talking to a coach right now actually about this, that I don't want to end up in the same position where I get super excited about something and suddenly have 4 jobs again. That I want to balance that work-life balance with my ambition. And I'm in the process of redefining what that is for me. And one of the things that my coach asked me to do is write down every time I just feel that urge to like push a little bit more, or like take on this extra project, or do this extra thing that's not actually part of my job description, just to show how frequently it's happening, so I can start to control that. And I can take that and say, all right, these are the things that I'm thinking about. Let me put them in a like in Todoist in like a little note section or something. And
Let
if
me
at
put it in a
some
bucket.
point, exactly, if at some point I want to pull out of the bucket and act on one of those things, great. But I no longer feel that need for immediacy to immediately jump on that. And I'm learning to be happy in the role that I have right now, and that is a very new experience for me.
Yeah, that impulse to prove yourself,
Yes,
get that in check. It's like I do that too, where it's like that's how you end up in 4 jobs. It's because silly Andrew, you felt like you had to prove to people that you could do 4 different jobs. It's like you wrote your own fate with this one.
exactly.
Be your own best ally. If you wouldn't give the person that you work for the advice to go chase this unrelated thing to what they do every day, then why would you go do it yourself? Take your own
Exactly.
advice.
And that is one of the biggest takeaways I had from this as well. I can spend all day blaming my previous company for giving me that amount of work to try to handle concurrently. I need to take responsibility for the fact that I opened those doors and I said, yes, give me these things to do.
Mhm.
And I am responsible for my own future. It is not somebody else's responsibility to choose that for me. And so knowing that about myself, that I like opening these doors, I might need to just put a chair under the doorknob so I can't open the door or something like that, just to, prevent myself from, feeling that urge to open more doors again.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I like what you're really kind of describing from my perspective is like this idea of being present in the current moment, being conscious of your current situation. So we might have some listeners out there that are listening to this right now, and they themselves are being present and conscious. And after listening to this, are thinking, "Wow, I might actually need to create some change in my life." So let's talk about like the transition that you've had coming out of this burnout. and how you started to rethink your priorities. So as you were considering your next move out of Spot and ultimately leading to Zapier, Zapier,
You're learning.
Oh,
I
good
caught
job, Ben.
myself. Yeah. So what were the key non-negotiable things that you looked for in companies, specifically around like the culture and your role, just to make sure that it was going to be a long-term sustainable place for you?
So when I was thinking about what I wanted, some of them are deeply personal to me. I wanted to work for one of two types of companies. One was fully remote, remote by default, no offices, not like a hybrid in-office plus remote model, or they had to have an office in Atlanta that I could go to. I'm a very social person, and so I need to have that social connection. And a company that is remote by default is going to intentionally create that connection in a different way that a company that has like a hybrid model
Yeah.
or an in-office model
Yeah,
would.
totally.
I love it.
That was number one for me, because part of what contributed to the burnout was also the feeling of loneliness and feeling that isolation. And I did not want to have that again. Number two is I'm very passionate about engineering leadership, and I want to continue down that journey. There's a lot that I can learn still from where I am today. And I've taken a very roundabout way to get to where I am today, given my educational background and, teaching myself how to code versus the traditional, go to school for computer science, get your first job as an IC and move up. I went from teach myself how to code at 11 to go to grad school or undergrad and grad school for something totally different, to freelancing, to running my own company. And then I finally took my first air quotes real job in 2022 when I started working for somebody else. So very, very different path that I took there. So part of that I wanted to understand, like, how can I continue to grow as an engineering leader? And one thing that I had never experienced before was working at a larger company. And I don't mean like a Microsoft, like 10,000 plus, employees. The largest company I had worked for was a 100-person company. Like,
Wow.
there was a lot of room for growth there.
Yeah.
And Zapier hit that like perfect size that gives me an opportunity to see things at scale where I don't know everybody at the company or everything that's going on. And it's not my job to anymore. That is a skill that I need to learn. And I knew that about myself. But how can I now contribute to a larger organization where I'm playing a very critical role in my zone? And it's kind of forcing me to kind of stay in my swim lane as well.
Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you and to follow your work?
So my personal website is kv.com. You can find most of my links on there. I have not linked After Burnout on there yet, so I need to do that, but that is at afterburnout.co. My other newsletter is modernleader.is.
Amazing. So we'll make sure that we include the links to Kelly's newsletters in our show notes, and it'll also be on Substack. Be sure to check out our publication on Substack as well. We're recommending the publications, and they're recommending us as well. So both of them are connected. They're easy to find from each other. Be sure to follow these conversations, and I'm certainly going to be reading along on Kelly's After Burnout journey. And I know that there's more ahead for her. And if you're listening to this episode and you got this far and you're somehow not already subscribed to Dev Interrupted, please do me a favor before you leave and go fix that. And you can join almost 20,000 engineers and engineering leaders over on Substack as well at devinterrupted.substack.com. Because each week we cover the latest news in engineering and tech. We write deep dives and articles related to our guests like Kelly today. And we cover so much cool research, guys. You have to be reading this. And remember, if you're only listening to this podcast, you're only getting like a fraction of the story. And thanks again, Kelly, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me again. As always, it's been a great time.
See you next week, y'all.